Once there existed two large empires on opposing sides of the then known world. In the west there was the Roman Empire, and in the east there was the Chinese Empire. These two great civilizations knew about each other and traded with each other indirectly along the Silk Road. But how much did they really know about each other? And was there ever direct contact between the Romans and the Chinese? Were there ever Roman embassies to the Chinese emperor, or vice versa? And consequently, were there ever Chinese ambassadors arriving at the imperial court of the Roman emperor? These are some fascinating questions which we can hopefully shed some light on in this video. It is written in the book of Ho-Han Shu, also known as the History of the Later Han, that during the reign of the Emperor Huan of the Han dynasty, there arrived a group of people from the faraway empire of Dacian. They claimed to be representatives of the Dacian ruler Andun and offered gifts to the court of the Emperor Huan. This is what happened in the year AD 166 of the Western calendar, and it is thought that the name of the ruler Andun was derived from the name Antoninus. This is one of several instances in which representatives from the Roman Empire arrived at the court of the Chinese emperor. So the Chinese knew about the Roman Empire, which they called Dacian, which they saw as some sort of far distant Western analog of the Chinese Empire. However, their knowledge of the Roman Empire was somewhat limited, and fact and fiction were often intermingled, making the Roman Empire seem like this distant, mythical, almost fantastical empire located somewhere in the far west of the then known world from the Chinese perspective. The Chinese diplomat and explorer Gan Ying traveled to the far west in 97 AD, but he never reached Dacian. However, he collected knowledge of that mystical empire from probably the Parthians and reached as far as the Persian Gulf. He described the Roman Empire as a powerful empire possessing more than 400 walled towns, with walls being made out of stone, something which apparently impressed the Chinese very much. Even the Roman road network and the Roman postal system were described by Gan Ying. It is not exactly known if Chinese ever reached the Roman Empire. However, there exists an interesting excerpt from the Roman historian Florus, who described the visit of numerous envoys, including the Ceres, to the court of the Emperor Augustus. Serica was the Roman name of China, which could be translated as the land of silk, and consequently the Ceres were the inhabitants of Serica, so they were the Chinese. And Florus described Ceres as being among the envoys visiting the court of Augustus. However, if these really were Chinese is hard to reconstruct, since their appearance was not described in great detail, only that their complexion was different and that they were people of another world than the Roman one. The Romans in turn had some basic knowledge of the geography of China. The 1st century geographer Pomponius Mela noted that Serica formed the center of the coast of an eastern ocean, flanked by India to the south and the Scythians of the northern steppe, while the historian Ammianus Marcellinus wrote that the land of the Ceres was enclosed by great natural walls around a river called Bautis, perhaps the Yellow River. In his geography, Ptolemy also provided a rough sketch of the Gulf of Thailand and the South China Sea, with a port city called Katigara lying beyond the Golden Chersonese, visited by a Greek sailor named Alexander. Among the proposed sites for Ptolemy's Katigara are Ok Eo in Vietnam, where Roman artifacts have indeed been found. But relations between the West and China went further back than the Romans. After Alexander the Great had established his impressively large empire, the easternmost successor state of this empire came to be the Greco-Bactrian kingdom. This kingdom lasted from 256 BC to 120 BC, and so interestingly, this was the last independent Greek state, because Greece itself was conquered by Rome already in 146 BC. Now, this Greco-Bactrian kingdom exerted not only great cultural influence into India, but there is evidence that Greeks from that kingdom interacted with the Chinese. Greek items were found in Chinese tombs, and there is also this fascinating Chinese tapestry found in the Xinjiang province in China, showing a centaur and what looks to be a Greek soldier with blue eyes. It was also during that time, in the late 2nd century BC, in 114 BC to be precise, that trade between the West and China was established along the Silk Road. The name Silk Road already gives away the main item of trade, which was silk, that was produced by Chinese silkworms. Chinese silk was a greatly sought after luxury item in Rome, Egypt, and Greece of those times. Other lucrative commodities from the East included tea, dyes, perfumes, and porcelain, whereas the Western exports included horses, camels, honey, wine, and gold. It is only logical then that trade between the West and China along the Silk Road would continue after the establishment of the Roman Empire in 27 BC. And now to something different, the SPQR Shop. They make amazing rings, amazing pendants, attributes, terracottas, coin replicas. They make a lot of wonderful replicas of Roman items, and it's all 100% handcrafted. Let me tell you, the level of craftsmanship is absolutely incredible. You can even buy the one and only Maiorianus ring, and you can only get it on the SPQR Shop. But there are of course many other rings and amazing items that the SPQR Shop crafts with an incredible attention to detail. And with a code in the description, you will get a 20%, I repeat, a 20% price reduction on every purchase on the SPQR Shop. So don't hesitate and buy something nice for you or someone else as a present who also happens to like Roman history. Thanks for your attention, and back to the video. Because of that continued trade along the Silk Road, the Romans of course knew of China. After all, they called it, as we said before, Serica, the land of silk, and the Chinese therefore knew of the existence of a great empire rivaling their own in the West. However, there had been no direct interactions of embassies between Dacian and Serica, as we said before that the embassy to the court of Augustus may very well have not consisted of Chinese, but other peoples from the Asian steppe or India might have been mistaken for Chinese. The first real direct contact between those two great empires then came in AD 166, as I mentioned before. This embassy probably came from the south by the sea. They brought presents such as rhinoceros horns, ivory, and tortoise shells, which they had acquired in South Asia, as it was surmised that they probably had lost their original gifts due to robbery or shipwreck and used these gifts instead. Most historians believe, though, that this was a group of Roman merchants that arrived in China rather than official diplomats sent by Antoninus Pius or Marcus Aurelius. The next visitors from Dacian arrived at the court of Sun Zhongmo, the ruler of Eastern Wu during the period of the Three Kingdoms, in AD 226. The merchant was given the name of Qianlun, and he came from the Roman Empire via Jiaozhou, which was the name back then for the region of Vietnam. He too was not an official diplomat, but very likely a Roman merchant. Indeed, archaeological findings show that Roman merchants must have been quite active in the area of modern-day Cambodia and Vietnam, since Mediterranean goods from that time have been found all over Southeastern Asia. Other visitors from the West arrived at the court of Cao Wei, and their gifts included glassware of various colors. Some years later, a Dacian craftsman was mentioned as showing the Chinese how to make glass by means of fire, so basically how to glassblow. Another Roman embassy is mentioned of having arrived at the Chinese Jin Empire in AD 284 during the reign of Emperor Wu of Jin. This embassy was presumably sent by the Roman Emperor Carus. After that, for a few centuries, no mentions of visitors from Dacian are mentioned in Chinese texts. However, something very interesting happened during the reign of the Emperor Justinian. Trade along the Silk Road was controlled by the Sassanid Empire, and of course, logically, they would impose tariffs and restrictions on trade, making silk increasingly expensive and difficult to obtain in the West. In times of war between the Romans and the Persians, silk trade would be entirely shut down. So the Romans really wanted to be able to produce silk of their own. It was great luck then that in 551 AD, two unidentified monks, most likely members of the Nestorian Church, went to China, and there they managed to observe how silk was produced from silkworms. They went to the West with that knowledge and told the emperor in Constantinople. The emperor promised them great gifts if they would manage to bring silkworms to the West. And indeed they complied and managed to smuggle out silkworm eggs or very young larvae of silkworms from China, traveling back along the northern route through the Caucasus and the Caspian Sea. It is believed that they hid the silkworm larvae or eggs in their bamboo canes. And thus, shortly thereafter, in the later 550s, silk factories sprung up in Constantinople, Beirut, Antioch, Tyre, and Thebes. This allowed the Eastern Roman Empire to have a silk monopoly in Europe, which would be a great source of revenue and the backbone of the Eastern Roman economy for the next 650 years until 1204. But even after the smuggling of silkworms to the West, contact between the Eastern Romans, who now continued the legacy of the Romans now that the Western Empire was no more, continued. However, interestingly, the name of the Roman Empire in Chinese texts had changed in the 7th century. In Chinese texts, henceforth that empire was not called Dacian anymore, but Fulin. This was just a different name to denote the by that time Greek-speaking Eastern Roman Empire. Several embassies arrived from Fulin in China. In AD 643, an embassy arrived at the court of Emperor Taizong of Tang, claiming to represent their emperor Constans II. They brought gifts of red glass and green gemstones. Other embassies are mentioned in 667, 701 or 711, another one in 719, and another one in 742. Then another embassy is mentioned in the history of Song, which arrived in Serica in 1081 AD, having been sent by a certain Mieli Shalin Kaiser, which can be identified as Michael VII Parapinaces Caesar. Then another embassy in 1091 AD during the reign of Alexius I Komnenos. Then, later in the Yuan dynasty, an Eastern Roman called Aisye, a name probably derived from Joshua or Joseph, even became the head astronomer and physician for the court of Kublai Khan. Kublai Khan is known to have sent Nestorian monks to the Eastern Roman court of Andronikos II Palaiologos, whose half-sisters were married to the great-grandsons of Genghis Khan, thus fascinatingly making this Eastern Roman emperor an in-law with the Mongol ruler in Beijing. The last known interaction between Fulin and Serica took place in the late 1300s, when the Hongwu emperor sent a merchant of Fulin back to the west with a letter announcing the founding of the Ming dynasty. But since Constantinople fell half a century later, this then is the last recorded interaction between Eastern Romans and China. And thus ended 1400 years of interactions between these two great empires, Datien and later Fulien in the west, and Serica, the land of silk, in the east. If you like this video, please consider supporting us on Patreon or via a YouTube membership, because it is your support which makes this channel possible. You would have my utmost gratitude. And of course, I want to thank everybody who's supporting Maiorianus in any form. You guys are simply amazing. And if you want to learn more about Fulien or the Eastern Roman Empire, you can watch this video in the upper right corner. But if you want to learn why the Eastern Roman Empire survived so much longer than the Western one, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias tibiago and bene valete.